Alright, so these notes are on the nervous system unit 2, and they're specifically on cells and organization. To start, a nerve cell is called a neuron. There are two types of neurons that exist in your nervous system. One type is called multipolar, and a second type is called unipolar. Now, regardless of the type of neuron, they have the same basic structural parts to them. The dendrites are the structures on a neuron that receive incoming messages. The cell body is going to integrate and process the incoming messages. The cell body is directly connected then to the axon, which sends outgoing messages. Sometimes the axon is covered in something called the myelin sheath, in which it's going to help to insulate the axon and increase the rate of nerve impulses. And then the axon terminals are at the very end, and they release neurotransmitters. So if we look here at a diagram of a neuron and the structures I just discussed, we see here is going to be kind of the start of the neuron, and messages are sent this way. So here we have the dendrites that receive incoming messages or stimuli. It gets integrated and processed here by the cell body. The neuron then makes a decision of what needs to happen, and an outgoing message is sent here out the axon to the axon terminals at the very end, where a neurotransmitter is released. You notice on the axon here, it looks like it's covered in a jelly substance. That's the myelin sheath I had mentioned, and that helps speed up the rate at which messages are sent along this axon. Here's just another image that shows a different depiction of a neuron. And it's just a good reminder that even though it looks weird and it has the dendrite, cell body, axon terminal, at the heart of it, it's still the same type of cell that you remember studying in biology. It has organelles like the nucleus, mitochondria, Golgi body, endoplasmic reticulum. So it's still the same type of cell. It just has a unique structure or shape to it to help it complete its unique nervous system functions. Now again, one of the types of neurons I mentioned was a unipolar neuron. A unipolar neuron is used specifically in our bodies to send afferent or sensory input to the central nervous system. Notice in that first sentence that afferent and sensory have the slash or the backward slash in between them. Those words are interchangeable. So the concept of sending messages to the central nervous system or to our brain goes through either what's called the afferent path or the sensory path. So again, unipolar neurons have the specific job of sending messages to the central nervous system. And in fancy anatomy terms, it just means they're sending it through the afferent path or the sensory path to the central nervous system. Now, unipolar neurons are called that because they have a very unique structure or shape to them. Their job is not to process the incoming messages. Their job is to get the messages from point A to B as fast as possible. So because they don't have to process or integrate the incoming messages, that means they don't need dendrites next to their cell body. So you're going to notice that when we look on the next page, it kind of looks like this weird tumor blob growing out of the middle of our neuron. Again, in a unipolar neuron, the dendrites are still going to receive the stimulus message from some sensory organ. The message is still sent out the cell body, out the axon, and then in this case, to the central nervous system. So let's look at a diagram and kind of summarize this. So the first thing I notice right away is that this looks a lot different than the first diagram. Here are my dendrites. This right here could be my sensory organ, like my skin. I've got dendrites that pick up on an incoming message. I've got my cell body, my axon, and my axon terminals. So again, in a unipolar neuron, it's sending the message from some stimulant organ to the central nervous system or the brain as fast as possible. So that's why we don't see the dendrites connected to the cell body. To give an example of how this might be used in your body, let's say you touch something really hot. So thermoreceptors in your skin over here pick up on a huge increase in temperature that could be dangerous. This message is sent and picked up through the dendrites to the cell body, out the axon, to your nervous system, so that your brain then can make a decision of what you need to do. Either leave your hand and melt/light on fire, or remove your hand from the flame. That would always be the wiser choice. The second type of neuron is a multipolar neuron. They almost have the exact opposite functions and structures. A multipolar neuron is used to send efferent or motor messages from the central nervous system to some organ, so the exact reverse direction. Here you notice efferent and motor are the same type of terminology. So to send any sort of stimulus message or response from the central nervous system to an organ is the efferent path or the motor output path. Now, multipolar neurons do process messages, and they do integrate and prioritize them. Therefore, in multipolar neurons, we see the dendrites directly next to the cell body. Same basic process. We have dendrites receiving some sort of message. In this case, with multipolar neurons, it's coming from the central nervous system. The message is sent to the cell body, it integrates and processes it, it goes out the axon, and the message is sent to some sort of effector organ. So let's look at a diagram to make sure we understand what that means. All right, so again, here's my multipolar neuron, and it looks just like what we looked at in our first diagram, right? So we see just a basic overview: dendrites, cell body, axon, axon terminals. In the case of a multipolar neuron, messages are going from the central nervous system to an organ. Notice that's the exact reverse of unipolar. Central nervous system to an organ. This direction of message from the central nervous system to an organ is called the efferent output or motor output path. So again, if we go back to your hand is in a flame, your body sensed the increase in temperature, message was sent to your nervous system. Your central nervous system now makes the decision, we should pull that hand away. This message goes in through the dendrites, the cell body, out the axon terminals. It's going to stimulate the muscles in your arm and your hand to jerk your hand out of the flame. Now, yes, your nervous system has these large cells called neurons, but they do all the major functions of your nervous system. They're very important. They run essentially every single organ system in your body. So to make sure that your body keeps these really special neurons intact and healthy, they have smaller nerve cells called neuroglia that help to support the neurons, insulate the neurons, and protect them from infection. It's important to notice that neuroglia are not the same as neurons. They can't transmit nerve impulses, they can't pick up on a stimulus, they can't send messages to or from the nervous system. Their only job is to support and protect the neurons. There are a total of 6 neuroglia that we're going to cover: astrocytes, microglia, ependymal cells, oligodendrocytes, Schwann cells, and satellite cells. The first type we're going to look at is called an astrocyte. Astrocytes are neuroglia that connect the neurons to capillaries. Their job is to transfer blood and nutrients, any type of gases that's in the blood, any food nutrients, to and from the neurons, and likewise remove any waste from the neurons. So when I'm looking here at this diagram, I see my neuron here, I see my blood vessel here, and my astrocyte in the center. So you can see the astrocyte is kind of the go-between from your cardiovascular system to the neurons. That way the neurons can still get the nutrients they need and can still get rid of the waste they need to get rid of, but really they don't have to do any of the thinking that goes with it or any of the work. The astrocyte will do all the work for it, so the neuron can just focus on sending nervous system messages. And here we see another image you can see very clearly here. The astrocyte connects directly from the bloodstream here to the neuron back and forth. The next type of neuroglia is called a microglia, and the job of the microglia is to phagocytize neuron debris and infectious agents. So what does that mean? Phagocytize in science is a big fancy word for surround and engulf, or surround and eat something. So the job of the microglia is to find any bacteria or viruses that might be surrounding your neurons, to surround them and eat them and get rid of them so that your nervous system doesn't get infected. Remember, if your nervous system gets infected, it's pretty much over. It's running your entire body in existence. So it's very important that we do not get sick in that organ system. Our next type of neuroglia are ependymal cells. They are pillow-shaped cells that line your brain cavity and your spinal cord cavity. So here they are over here, and you can see they kind of look like little squishy pillows with little hairs or fringe on the end. Those little hairs or fringe are used then to circulate cerebrospinal fluid and provide shock absorption. So remember, your spine is surrounded by this nutrient-rich fluid that provides it with vitamins it needs, along with absorbing some shock when we move around and bounce into things. And you have the similar fluid around your brain. Well, in our bodies, we don't ever want fluid to just sit or become sedentary, because that increases the chance of it holding bacteria, viruses, or even decomposing. So you always want it circulating. These little cilia that are on the ependymal cells wave back and forth like little fingers to constantly move that fluid around so it never just sits in one place. The pillow-like part of the ependymal cell is what provides the shock absorption. Just like a pillow would if you were to cover yourself in pillows, those pillows surrounding our spinal cord and our brain provide a little cushion to when our brain and spinal cord bump around against the bones that are housing them. Here you can see an actual image of your ependymal cells. Here are the pillow-like parts of the cells, and the cilia up here that would be beating that cerebral spinal fluid around, back, and forth to make sure it doesn't stay in one place. Our next type of neuroglia is called an oligodendrocyte. An oligodendrocyte is a flat, straw-shaped cell. I kind of think of it almost like a fruit roll-up, like if you were to partially unwrap a fruit roll-up. The job of the oligodendrocyte is to wrap around the neuron's axon, and it actually helps form that fatty tissue we looked at called the myelin sheath. So here you can kind of imagine if I partially unwrap my fruit roll-up and start to wrap that open part around the axon, it's going to insulate or cover up the axon, forming the myelin sheath. We see another image of it here. Here is the oligodendrocyte partially unwrapped, and those unwrapped parts then cover and wrap up the axons of neurons in our body. Our last two cells are Schwann and satellite cells. Schwann cells form the myelin sheath with oligodendrocytes, and satellite cells provide protective cushioning around the cell body of neurons. Satellite cells are a lot like ependymal cells, but you only find them surrounding the cell bodies of neurons. So we're going to move now from talking about different types of neurons and types of neuroglia to junctions. Junctions are the places or meeting points between two neurons or a neuron and an organ. In some other classes or higher level learning, you might learn this as a synapse or synaptic cleft. And really the junctions are just the locations where very special chemicals called neurotransmitters are released. So when I look at this diagram here, I see my dendrites, my cell body, here's my axon, axon terminal, and these little purple dots are that chemical called the neurotransmitter being released. That neurotransmitter that's released at a junction is actually what allows your neurons and stimulates them to send messages to your central nervous system or from your central nervous system. And it's those responses that allow you to stay healthy and balanced or help you maintain homeostasis. However, it is unfortunately or fortunately, however you would like to look at it, not quite that simple. Your nervous system is a very complex organ system that's organized into different levels that allows our nervous system to communicate to different types of neurons and to different parts of the body. All stimuli messages are going to go to the brain and are sent through the sensory or afferent division. And anything that's coming away from the brain is going out the efferent or motor division. And its choices are either going to be the autonomic or somatic division or the sympathetic or parasympathetic division. So let's look at a diagram of what this is saying. Whew. This is not a concept map. This is actually a very complex diagram that shows how our nervous system receives stimulus messages and then sends messages out to organs. Here we start over here with some sort of stimulus or homeostatic imbalance. Your body picks up on that stimulus or imbalance. It sends a message through neurons that are part of your peripheral nervous system or sensory afferent input, and it goes to your brain and your central nervous system. Your brain or central nervous system then makes a decision of what needs to happen. This outgoing message goes through the motor efferent output division, and now it branches to a lot of areas. If it is something you consciously choose to do, or it is a voluntary response, from the motor efferent output division, it goes out the somatic division. If you do not choose to do it, and it's an involuntary reflex, from the motor efferent output division, it goes out the autonomic division. Now we have two choices in the involuntary section. It can either go out the sympathetic division or parasympathetic. Sympathetic is for emotional responses. Parasympathetic is for non-emotional responses. We're going to look at these in much more depth, but because I know that probably was just a little bit confusing, let me give one example. So let's say someone is threatening to fight you at school. They're swearing at you, they're throwing things at you, posturing at you. That would be the initial stimulus. This message of sort of a life or death situation is sent through your sensory afferent division to your central nervous system. Your central nervous system makes a decision of what needs to happen. All it knows right now is that you are about to either die or live, and you need to do something to do one or the other. A message is sent out the motor efferent output division, out the autonomic division, out the sympathetic division. And all of a sudden, your heart rate starts racing, your pupils dilate, you start sweating, you feel a little jittery, right? And those are all reactions. You're not controlling, you're not deciding, yeah, now would be a great time to start breathing heavy and be sweaty. These are involuntary responses triggered by an emotional stimulus that are making your body do things. So again, we had the stimulus and it took this route here, and all those things happened. But we'll look at that more in a little bit. Let's take a minute to break down what all these words and these levels mean. So we've used now several times sensory and afferent. They are interchangeable, and it refers to any sort of stimulus message going toward the central nervous system. We've also used the word motor or efferent, and that just refers to any sort of response message being sent away from the central nervous system to some organ. The term somatic refers to something that is voluntary, so the somatic division refers to the set of neurons that are stimulated when you consciously decide to do something. Autonomic refers to involuntary, kind of like automatic or autopilot, things that just happen on their own. So the autonomic division is a set of neurons in your body that respond to involuntary reflexes. There are two divisions within the autonomic division. It can either be involuntary and emotional, which means it's going to trigger the nerves that are part of the sympathetic division, or it can be involuntary and non-emotional, which means it triggers the nerves in the parasympathetic division. So let's look how this would play out in different scenarios. Let's say you have a totally voluntary decision. You choose to smack your sister. P.S. Thurston High School does not condone violence against siblings or anyone else, but let's say you make this choice anyways. So the stimulus is your conscious decision to smack your sister. This message goes through the sensory afferent division to your central nervous system. Your nervous system responds. It sends the message out your motor efferent division. It's voluntary, so it goes out the somatic division to your effector organ. An effector organ just refers to the organ we may do something. In this case, it is the muscles in your arm and your hand which are used to swing backwards and then forward to smack your sister. What about for an involuntary, non-emotional response? Well, let's say you just had the most delicious cheeseburger at lunch, and after you've eaten the cheeseburger, your stomach is now going to secrete gastric juice into your stomach in order to help digest and metabolize the molecules in that delicious cheeseburger. You clearly did not choose that. It's not emotional. It's not like you were crying and every time you cry, your stomach secretes gastric juice. It is more of this kind of like living situation, a normal homeostatic reaction to keep you living and healthy. Sometimes they call this the rest and digest pathway. So your stimulus is that you drop this delicious cheeseburger in your stomach. Your stomach picks up on that. The stimulus message is sent through your sensory afferent division to your central nervous system. Your brain makes a choice that we need to start breaking down this cheeseburger. That decision is sent out the motor efferent division. It's automatically happening, so it goes out the autonomic division. It's not emotional, so it then goes out the parasympathetic division. And in this case, it stimulates the effector organ, your stomach, to secrete gastric juice to start breaking down that delicious cheeseburger. In our last scenario here, we have involuntary emotional responses. Let's go back to our fight. Once again, Thurston High School does not condone violence. So your stimulus was this girl yelling, screaming, posturing at you, throwing things. The stimulus message is sent through your sensory afferent division to your central nervous system. The choice then that we need to start pumping your heart and your lungs and dilating your pupils in order to prepare you to fight and save yourself is sent out the motor efferent division. It's happening on its own, so it goes out the autonomic division, and it is definitely emotional, so it goes out the sympathetic division. It then goes to the effector organs, which include your heart, your lungs, your eyes, sweat glands, to stimulate them to start increasing heart rate, breathing rate, dilate pupils, all to get you ready to save your own life.